Welcome to the first episode of the John David Ebert podcast. I'm your host, John David Ebert, and I'm the author of 26 books, the four most important of which I think are Art After Metaphysics, The Age of Catastrophe, The New Media Invasion, and Dead Celebrities, Living Icons. And my co-hosts on the show will be Leon Sandler, a writer who also teaches English overseas as a second language in Istanbul and Athens regularly. And from Australia, my other co-host is Matthew Keegan, a business and marketing consultant. And what we propose to do in this podcast is, with every episode, to analyze a different text, a different work of cultural discourse, and just see where it takes us as we discuss the text and look at them for their contemporary socio-political and cultural implications. And on this first episode, we'll be looking at Gilles Deleuze's 1992 text, Postscript on the Societies of Control. It's a very short text, but it's very dense, and it's been one of his most cited texts. So join all three of us now for an hour or so of discussion as we delve into Deleuze's text. Here we are. This is the first episode of the John David Ebert podcast with my co-hosts here, Leon Sandler and Matthew Keegan. And what we'd like to do is to start by discussing one of Deleuze's most heavily cited texts. I mean, everyone cites it, the Postscript on the Societies of Control, which he composed near the end of his life. He died in 1995, so this is 92 when he composed this. And it's had an influence, I think, out of all proportion to its size. It's just a few pages. And in it, I get the sense that he's building off of Foucault, and by the way, if anyone wants to read the best book ever written about Foucault, read Deleuze's book on Foucault. It's clarified so many things about Foucault for me that it was an eye-opener. He really understood Foucault. And so Foucault has this idea where he's got these different stages of Western European history, and they differ. Each time in each one of the books that he does, it's different. In the order of things, for instance, it's three distinctly different stages: the Renaissance episteme, what he calls the episteme, which is the structural modality of an age. And for Foucault, each one of these ages is structural in the sense that they're built up out of these strata. And so you have the Renaissance episteme, and then we have the classical episteme, which comes in to displace it in the 17th century. Both of those are essentially what he means later by the sovereign age. They're both comprised under the sovereign age, the Renaissance and the classical episteme. And the sovereign age is the rule of kingly authority. All institutions refer back to the king. If somebody is going to be punished, they're going to be punished in public, so that if you commit a crime under the sovereign age, you've committed a crime not against society, but against the king specifically. So he wants to make sure that in public you are tortured and humiliated, so everyone understands what will happen if you commit a crime which is a direct offense to the king. That's the sovereign age, sovereign authority. Everything refers back to him. So then we have, with long about the end of the 18th century, about the time of the French Revolution, Foucault's big epoch that he studied, I think, in all of his books in very thorough detail, is the disciplinary society, which is the age where institutions come in now. You get the hospital, you get the first sort of, the prison comes in now, and the soul of the person is tormented, because now if you commit a crime under the disciplinary regime, you've committed a crime against society. And so your soul is tormented, not your body. And so we get all these different institutions. We get the school coming in, we get the barracks, everything is a mold. As Deleuze says in this essay here on Postscript for the Societies of Control, that each one of these institutions is a kind of mold into which you are inserted and to which you must conform. And so we're always moving from one mold to the next, from the school to the barracks to perhaps the hospital every now and then, possibly to the prison. We're always moving from one mold to the next. And these disciplinary molds are something that we have to conform to. But then Deleuze then, I think, comes in and he adds this age, taking, I think, the term control from William Burroughs, for the society of control, where now it's not the factory anymore, it's the corporation. The corporation comes in and you're never finished. It's no longer molds that you have to conform to, it's modulation. Your entire life now is modulated by the society of control, which is electronic and digital, and the corporation is the primary entity, not the factory. And we're never done with the institutions. The institutions aren't molds anymore. They just spill out. If you're wearing an ankle bracelet, you're no longer in the prison, but now you're stuck with an ankle bracelet in your house. So the prison spills out into the society. Education is never finished. We're always continuing our education. We're always taking classes. Education is not something finished. So none of these molds any longer is self-contained. They're all in a process of disintegration, and we're always trying to modulate our lives and our activities to suit this society of control, which is always watching us with RFID chips or whatever the case may be. So it's always a case where we're, and Deleuze says it's not an accident that surfing comes in now as the primary sports instead of the traditional sports. Now it's surfing. You insert yourself into a wave and you modulate yourself in accordance with the wave. And so this is Deleuze adding, I think, this necessary epoch onto building off of Foucault. And it's just, that's in a nutshell, that's my synopsis of this little paper.
Great. Well, thank you for the synopsis, John. As you said, this is something that Deleuze wrote towards the end of his life, and it's received a pretty wide audience. It's continued to be popular and to be cited in scholarly work throughout the 90s up until today. And I guess one thing that interested me about this text in particular, and one reason why I wanted to start this podcast using this text, is because it seems to indicate a very prevalent, again, system of control in our present moment. What really interested me here was Deleuze's claim that, as the control society expands from different molds, from the factory, the school, the hospital, into a kind of omnipresent system, doesn't necessarily make things more stable. In fact, he claims that everything is in crisis, and all of these old forms of discipline are dying away. And so I've always seen this text in a kind of ambiguous light, where on the one hand, Deleuze is kind of issuing a warning about potential futures in which there is no easy way out of these structures of control, but at the same time, there's this sense in which these new systems of control offer new possibilities of resistance.
And so what do you see those possibilities of resistance being, Leon? That's the thing I trouble.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's what I struggle to grasp is what are these new modes of resistance? Because, and just to bring in your essay, John, on hypermodernity, sorry to diverge a little bit, but you talk about Marxism's dead, the community's dead, and art is dead. And I've always seen art as a very important mode of resistance. And it's interesting to me that Deleuze, who writes about art quite a bit, only has one sentence in this short essay where he mentions it.
Right, yeah.
And it's a negative sentence.
I noticed that too, yeah.
So that's kind of what I want to know. I want to know what these new what these new weapons are that he mentions, if you can, point me in the right direction at all, Leon.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting because he doesn't outline a specific program here. He just points at certain possibilities that he sees developing. But one thing that I keep thinking about is the notion of crisis, right? As he says, today, what is it? Here it is. The family is in crisis, right? All these different interiors are in crisis. And that's really how I am starting to see our present historical moment, as one ongoing perpetual crisis, right? Economic, political, ecological, social. It's not so much that this essay points to specific ideas for how to improve the world. It's more that I think he was trying to identify how he saw these systems of social control changing and adapting on the horizon.
Yeah, it's like we're always in crisis, and we're now, because these institutions that we've inherited are now leaky, and they're just leaking all over the place, and we're stuck with the residue. It's like we have to live our lives under this regime of these disintegrating institutions that just like keep sticking to us. And it's like we can't ever quite get them wiped off, somatically of our bodies and our minds. We're just stuck with this constant process of education, constant process of in and out of the hospital, in and out of the prison. And it's like, where does this point to? I mean, where does it go? What happens when, is there ever going to be a point where these institutions are no longer exerting any kind of influence over our lives? Or is it, this is another question too. I mean, does the society of control, how much is the old model of center periphery still, how much does that still apply, where the control, if you're trying to control something, there's always like a center of power that's exerting a force out over a periphery, like with the panopticon model that Foucault came up with, where, the prison, you're in the prison and you're constantly being monitored in a 360-degree radius, like the Greek god, what's his name, Argos, who has 1,000 eyes and he can see in all different directions. So there's nowhere you can go where he can't see you. That's the panopticon model. And it seems that was part of the disciplinary society, but it seems like it's carried over now in an electronified version, where we're constantly under surveillance by digital technology from these technologies from these shadowy corporations that are constantly just keeping tabs on us. It's like, why do I have to get an update from Microsoft on my computer? Constantly, I'm constantly receiving updates whether I like them or not. But what if it's the case that I don't like them and I don't want them? But it's like we're just sort of force-fed this this control now, which is decentralized. There doesn't seem to be a center. In the sovereign age, at least you knew where the persecution was coming from. It was the king. If you pissed the king off, at least you knew who was persecuting you. Or even in the disciplinary society, you knew that the institution was unhappy with your behavior. And if you wanted to get out of it, you had to conform to that behavior. But it's like now it's no pleasing any of these institutions, because they're constantly interfering with our lives. So anyhow, that's kind of what it makes me think of.
He says something, I can't find it at the moment, but he said something that we are now all free floating, and we're not individuals, we're dividuals, I believe is
Dividuals, right.
The term he uses. And we're so we're caught in banks, so data banks and things like that. And you point at it there, John, like at least in the disciplinary society, you had the prison you could see, and you knew in a sense that you were in the prison. It was concrete. Whereas now you kind of still are in a prison, but you're in this different type of prison that you can't quite grasp. You can't completely see. You're forced into this, like it's control. You're forced down this narrow path, and and you can't completely see it or grasp it because we are free floating, because it's digital. It's more liquid. If that,
I do like the way, in light of that he cites Kafka as as transitional between the disciplinary and the control society, because in Kafka it's like there's no end. He winds through this labyrinth in the trial looking for, he doesn't even know what he's being accused of. It's never even specified. He just knows he's under suspicion, and he spends the entire narrative trying to find a way through this labyrinth to find a source from where this persecution's coming from. and who's doing it and why. And it's like he never finds the answer. And so I like that idea of Kafka as the sort of prophet of the society of control. He already saw it coming. He already saw this endless process of deferral without resolution. We're always on trial, and there's never like a point where, oh, here's the day of the trial, and now I can hear the sentence, because you never get there. It's in the society of control. It's just, well, we know you've done something wrong. It's like, what exactly did I do wrong? It doesn't matter. We just know you're guilty, and it just goes on and on and on.
It's interesting that, again, in previous epochs, you had these different regiments of discipline. So these different spaces that you would go through, as he says with Foucault, right? Whether you're being disciplined in the school, or disciplined in the military, or disciplined in the factory, or at work, or however you phrase it. And that made life difficult, but you could also identify where you were, as you said, and you could identify what the limits of that particular institution were, and then you could identify who you were with in that institution. Yeah. So it gives the example of, let's say, factory workers, right? And if you work in a factory, it's difficult and really unpleasant. You have a boss who's always on you, but you're kind of part of this mass of other people together working on this factory floor, and you're all sharing in this condition. So at least that offers some possibility of connection, and we might say like mutual sympathy, and something like what Deleuze himself participated in the '68 protests in France.
Yeah.
Right. What we're seeing now is a society where it's much more labyrinthine, as you said. It's not one institution. It's a giant labyrinth, or Deleuze likens it to the coils of a serpent that just wind around you and have no end, right? And so that proposes a new problem that he sees on the horizon. He doesn't have an answer for it. He doesn't say, well, here's how we get out of it. Here's how we create a more egalitarian, a more liberated, or a more equal or free society. Just as this is kind of the shape that the method of control is taking now. It's constant, labyrinthine, it follows you around. And I think one of the most insidious things about it is how it divides, individuals from each other, and then divides them within themselves, right? So going to the example of the factory floor, I might not like my job, but I have my coworkers, I have my colleagues, I have everyone that I'm working with and who's struggling with me together. We have the same grievances, the same complaints, and we can begin formulating the same solutions. Right now, it feels like, the more that we see precarious, part-time, freelance work, the more individuals are kind of divided from each other and brought into a very atomized society. And the more it feels like people are even divided within themselves. Like when you become, for example, a freelancer, you work and you are your own boss. So you have to kind of discipline yourself. So it's not that you go into a place that disciplines you. It's that you have to internalize and carry this discipline with you at all times.
Yeah, I like that idea, because I was wondering about his term "dividual."
Mm-hmm.
As we're no longer individuals, we're dividual. But the prefix "div" means to divide, but it's also related to the word for two, duo, and it's like, how are we divided now? And it's just, so we're not like these monadic individual subjectivities. It's like the society of control now divides us from ourselves. I'd like to explore that idea. I like that a lot, about the dividual thing and the division, the schism that's now that the control society inflicts upon us. And it's like, is there any way of healing this schism? And what's the nature of this schism? How are we dividual?
He also has he says young people strangely today boast of being motivated.
Yeah, I caught that, yeah.
Which I find very interesting in the relation to the individual, because we see now that it's people, like we see it with Instagram and Facebook and all the positive motivational posts, as though is that motivation and is that positivity in itself not a form of control that stems from this society.
What's a little bit pathetic, though, about that is that why do people need to be motivated in the first place? Well, how come they're not just doing their stuff? And so, I mean, the idea of like a motivational speaker like Tony Robbins is like the perfect exemplar of this in this society. It's like, well, why does everyone need to be motivated? Doesn't that presuppose that everyone's just lazy and slothful and they're so overwhelmed with their situation that they don't know which way to go? So they need a guy who can straighten it all out for them, you know, give them the Ariadne thread through the labyrinth. How do I figure my life out, Tony? You've got the answer. I know you do.
Right. It's people asking in that case to have a leader, asking to have a certain regime to get through. But yeah, what's interesting about is that it gets into this idea of like personal branding, right? And that's how I see the individuation in our current society, in our current situation, right? The idea of a personal brand, that I'm supposed to be me, but I'm also supposed to just have my own brand and get myself out there and promote myself. And, you know, people who even say you should treat every interaction like a job interview. Right?
So pathetic.
That's grim.
The extent to which people believe that. Yeah. As the whole structure of this thing becomes more labyrinthine, you hear a lot today about a crisis, particularly among young men or young white men, that they feel lost and they don't quite know what the path to the future is, right? They're not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing with the rest of their lives because, again, every societal institution that was originally giving them that kind of guidance, right? The institution of the family, the institution of marriage, even the institution of the office or the job, having the same job for, say, 30 years. All that is now being wiped out, and it's being replaced by something, as Deleuze points out, a lot more fluid. Right? And so, yeah, I mean, you can see, I think, Tony Robbins or Jordan Peterson, right, as an example of someone who comes in and sees this kind of generation of people being set adrift or being lost within this perpetual labyrinth, never seeing a way towards anything like a final definition of success, and then offering, you know, a series of really trite, you know, pseudo-intellectual solutions, right? With Peterson, it's like, you know, stand up straight, put your shoulders back, as one of his rules.
Apparently, like, there's only 12 rules for life. There's just 12. That's it.
Right. That's kind of what people want as things get more labyrinthine and more confusing. And I think you're seeing this regression to very simplistic modes of rhetoric, very simplistic ideas as a way to deal with the what Deleuze calls the winding coils of this serpent that are hard to navigate. Right, and we see it in the rhetoric of people like Trump or Bolsonaro or name whoever you want. You know, it's really simple. These are the bad guys. Here are the good guys. We're going to build a wall to separate the good guys from the bad guys, and then everything will be clean and neat and easy. It's a way of, like, that kind of conceptual model, like the conceptual model of the wall, is a lot easier to think about in your head than you know, the conceptual model of global capitalism, which is constantly, you know, shifting borders and constantly changing, you know, the demands on people in different parts of the world, and that's all hard to grasp. But the idea of one leader, you know, one folk, one wall, that's conceptually easier, and it's more like the disciplinary society that Deleuze and Foucault, you know, through Foucault, describes in the first part of the essay.
Yeah, make America great again. That's it. That's all there is. It's just one idea, and this is how we do it.
And is this? Oh, sorry, John.
No, that was it. I was just throwing that out there to fuck around with.
But is this like to go back on Deleuze and Foucault's, like, one of their major influences? Is this not what Nietzsche was talking about, in a sense, where Nietzsche says there's multiple interpretations, the left nature, if you will, whereas there's not just this one way. Because what I keep seem to come back to is that we always are told that the goal is this happiness, this pot of gold at the end of the path or at the end of the rainbow, and it's happiness. And so then you become overwhelmed when you're not instantly happy, and we've got so much stuff coming at us all the time. But is it not that happiness is not the aim, that maybe there's something deeper, something more authentic, that maybe Nietzsche was referring to when he talked about multiple interpretations of things?
Mm-hmm.
Going outside those.
There was never a more ambiguous thinker than Nietzsche, and he loved taking up different positions, like even against himself. He loved even just playing devil's advocate with himself, just to fuck with you, the reader. And he enjoyed, he just enjoyed upsetting you, the reader. That was like his thing, with all these different kinds of possibilities. And so you're never going to get a straight answer from Nietzsche. It's just very, he loves ambiguities, and people try to boil him down to one thing or in a certain sense. He's like the philosopher of the control society. He's already looking ahead to it, where it's this endless labyrinth, and you go this direction or that direction. There is no clear way to go. You just have to surf it. You have to get on it and modulate the wave, find a wave that you can ride and surf your way through it. Who knows whether you're getting anywhere? Is a surfer surfing a wave getting anywhere? No, he's just riding the wave until the wave dies. Go ahead.
It's really interesting. I mean, when you think about, let's say that right now, the end goal that's supposed to be at the end of this labyrinth that we find ourselves in is some kind of, constant, perpetual happiness, right? Whatever that might mean, like any definition of happiness, it has to be just vague enough to work, right? But it's always, as Deleuze says, it's always deferred, right? There's always another seminar or another book to read or another job to, you might make another career change. You might move somewhere else, right? This end goal, which I think in previous epochs used to be so clear, as the institutions that you made your way through in life were clear. The end goal itself has become constantly deferred, constantly labyrinthine, and that is itself another problem, that we don't even know how to reach an end goal.
Yeah, and is there even one that we know of? I mean, it's like if you take Aristotle's idea of the entelechy is always trying to get to a telos. It has a specific goal, the telos of the tree. The acorn has the telos to get to the tree, and then once it's there, it's like, I'm done. I'm tree now. And it's like, well, what about our human lives under the conditions of the control society? What is the telos? And it's like, I don't think anybody's has any idea. I'm not even clear what the telos of my life is, and it's constantly deferred. There's always another seminar. Right. I like that. There's always next weekend. Yeah, go ahead.
And so again, you have figures, arising at our particular historical moment that are offering, I think, quick and easy solutions to these nebulous, serpentine kind of problems. Whether those are, again, problems at the level of the nation state or problems psychologically with the individual, not knowing where to go, not knowing what they want, not even knowing, how it's possible to feel happy anymore in a lot of cases. But what's interesting to me is that all the proposed solutions don't seem to work very well, right? That's what I find so interesting about this particular moment that we're all in. It's, one perpetual crisis after the other, and then different actors proposing different solutions, but none of the solutions ever really seem to be solutions, whether that's, Trump promising to make America great again, and then it's not so great, or you have, the election of, let's say, a far left party in Greece that promises to leave the EU and then it doesn't. Or you have, let's say, on the Tony Robbins, Jordan Peterson side of individual motivation and psychology, you have, these rules for life that once you actually drill into them are incredibly simplistic and don't give you that reward at the end of the tunnel that you're always looking for.
Yeah, one of my favorite Nietzsche quotes is from one of his notebooks, where he says, "A preponderance of mandarins is a sure sign that something has gone wrong in an age." You like in China with the 1,000 schools, of whom most of it's gone because it was all book burned. But what's left is Confucius and Lao Tzu and Mo Tzu and a few guys, Chuang-Tzu. But that was a major age of crisis there in China in the 7th century down to the 5th century that produced all these schools. And it's like, it's not a sign of intellectual health, I think. It's not a sign that an age is doing well when there's a jillion thinkers and they all have a different solution because they're, something has gone wrong. The conditions for living have become so problematic in a given age that now we need to hear a billion different solutions. And it's not like an age, when it was Plato and Aristotle, and they just had the academy and the Lyceum, and that's where you went. It was very simple and straightforward. Just listen to these guys. It's not like that now. It's just, Jordan Peterson clones, 1 billion of them. Tony Robbins clones, 1 billion of them. And it's too many. It's too many. It's too many different solutions. And I think it ends up being more confusing than helpful to hear all this. I'm thinking of the TED Talks. It's like that. It's that TED Talks mentality. It's like, I can't stand TED Talks. I think they're like the worst intellectual forum ever invented. They're not motivational. They're depressing, and I find them boring and uninteresting and almost invariably shallow. And they never have a grasp on ambiguity. They're always like, here's the problem, and it's very simple. Let me boil it down. And it's not simple. We're living in an age of fractal complexity that everyone feels overwhelmed by, or we wouldn't all be discussing how to live our lives. And it's a labyrinth. I think that the Kafkaesque labyrinth is like a perfect metaphor for it.
Mm-hmm. I'm also not a fan of the TED Talks. I'll just put that out there. But
Good.
Yeah.
We're in agreement then.
I will say, except one's good. I admire him as Sir Ken Robinson. His stuff on education, I think, is very, very good. Where he actually talks about, but I'm getting sidetracked. But where he talks about how when you give kindergarten kids a paperclip, and they can come up with all these ways to use a paperclip. And then if you keep giving it to them, it declines as they go further along in schooling, which I think kind of says something where they were pushing everyone into these narrow ways of thinking, which clearly I don't think is working, because we've never seen anxiety and depression, particularly in youth, at such a high rate. And I don't know if that's something because we're overstimulated, or we're continually told to operate in these narrow ways, or told to have this goal. You're told to get it in numerous different ways, as you said, in the labyrinth, and it's just endless. Like, yeah, I mean, I've got a degree and I don't use it. Now I'm doing another degree. It's just perpetual education.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
What's your degree in, Matthew?
Business with marketing. And now, and like, that's the one you.
And that's still not good enough. Right?
Yeah, yeah. And then it's like, yeah, and it's just, yeah, it's endless. Leon had a status the other day about the university system, where it was like $26,000 get you a degree. Oh, does it give me work and meaning? And the university system's like, what? What's that? Yeah, there's just yeah.
We no longer see the end point of doing things like that anymore. Like I have to get a degree, or I have to get this qualification, this certification, this training, but it's never clear that after that I'll arrive at some kind of static state where everything will be fine. Like now we don't arrive at a static state where everything's fine. That's that idea. I think what do we have to do now? Like, we know things are bad. We know it's a giant labyrinth. We know it's the coils of a serpent and all that. So what do we have to do now? I think one thing is we have to abandon the idea of reaching a steady state, right? As hard as that is, we can't hold on to the idea that, okay, if I just go through 1 or 2 or 3 more things, it's going to be fine. If I just get this degree, that degree, if I just listen to this guru, that guru, the answer will be there at the end. No, we're living in a much more interesting time where, we have to, again, as you said, John, get used to riding the wave. Get used to just undulating and going up and down with these different changes and transformations and crises and crashes. So the less attached we are to one particular end goal, right, the better, I think, equipped we are.
But then,
to do what we're living in.
Sorry. But then does that mean that we have to abandon the community? Does that mean that we have to just ride the wave in as ourselves and forget? Is that what you're saying? Because we ride this wave, does that mean, like John says in his essay, is the community then dead?
See, that's a really interesting question, and I'd like to explore that a lot, because I think, again, one of the biggest problems with the control society, as Deleuze talks about it, is that it divides each of us from each other and divides us within ourselves, right? And if I really had to identify one overarching problem, I would say it's that one, right? It's the fact that, maybe this is just my perspective, but the fact that we're now so atomized and so focused on, again, personal branding and personal success and personal development, that it becomes difficult for us to even imagine coming together and getting a shared sense of reality, a shared agreement on what is actually happening and what can we do. So I don't think it's that we should abandon the community at all. I think we actually need to try to branch out more and build other communities that are built along different lines of identity, different lines of community, right? Your community now might not be just the people that you're physically located with in a particular space. It might be the people who share your language, the people who share some particular subset of your identity, some particular subset of how you find yourself in this. So, I think actually rebuilding a sense of ourselves as integral, people, and then rebuilding the idea that we are in this together, whatever this is, whatever this perpetual crisis may be, we're in it together. Now we should definitely do whatever we can to keep going with that, or to bring that back from the dead, as we might say. And so, just returning to the text, maybe we can go through it a bit, and maybe we can think about, so where does that leave us? Right? Where are we now? Are we just lost in a perpetual labyrinth with no hope of escape? Or are there still possibilities for riding this wave or getting through the coils of this serpent in a way that's productive and empowering and maybe you could say joyful?
Well, we're left with a lot of dead institutions. I mean, that's a thing, that I get from this essay from Deleuze is that we're just dealing with these institutions that came about with the disintegration of the sovereign society in the age where power was centralized by the king, and then that gets displaced to the disciplinary society with all of these separate institutions governing our lives. And now we're dealing with all these dying institutions. School is dying. Everyone knows that. The university system is in a total state of chaos. Prisons are overcrowded. So now they're having to farm out penality at your house with an ankle bracelet. You don't have to come to the jail. We'll accommodate you at your house. We'll go meet you there. And it's like all these institutions are like that. The hospital, everything. And so I don't know, it's every single age has its own structures, has its own strata, its own, what Foucault would call an episteme that governs the rules for discourse in that age. And I like this idea of the control society, that it just won't leave us alone, and it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. But we're still left with this labyrinth, aren't we? That seems like the final image that I'm taking away here, is this idea of a labyrinth that doesn't have a goal. It's like a rhizome. It has no beginning, no ending. You can enter it at any point and get stuck and lost in it. And yet somehow it seems to be the best model for where we're at right now. Each of us is stuck in a sociocultural maze that all we can do is spend our lives trying to navigate through it. And there doesn't seem to be a resolution. We always want a resolution, because I think the human mind likes resolutions. It likes a beginning, middle, and end. It likes narratives that are like that. But maybe this has no beginning, no middle, and no end. And we're just stuck with the ongoing nowness of it. And
Right.
I mean, I'm 50 now, and I've lived longer than you guys have. And I can tell you, I don't get any more of a sense of resolution from my life at 50 than I did when I was 30. Zero. It's the same feeling of endless uncertainty, endless deferral, endless, well, I'll try this next and that. And it never does feel like it comes to a resolution, but you want it to. You want to get to the point where you feel like, I met the goal. There it is. It's perfect. But that day never, it doesn't, you'll never get there. Trust me. It's Kafka.
So the labyrinth and the idea of a way out of the labyrinth, or an end point to the labyrinth, is one mental model that we can think of this as.
Yeah.
It's not a particularly cheery one, because it's a kind of almost like Kafka or Borges, like the labyrinth is constantly shifting, right? Constantly changing on you, so that whenever you think you have a way out, whenever you think you're free, whenever you think you've finally reached the end point, oh, look, you're precarious again. You're deferred again. You're uncertain about the future again. So the labyrinth is one rather imposing mental model that we could use for the control society. But the other would be, let's say, the image of the wave that Deleuze brings up with surfing, right? He talks that now, traditional sports have been replaced by this idea of surfing, of just going with this energy, rather than exerting your own. And so maybe we can think about this in Deleuze's repertoire as making yourself more nomadic, making yourself more chaotic and more flexible, right? Making yourself more liquid to adapt to what Zygmunt Bauman might call the liquid modernity in which you find yourself, where everything is constantly shifting and moving. I mean, it's not so much that we're looking for a way out, and we'll finally, if we just take the right route, we'll have our way out. It's more like we need to adapt ourselves to, to go with the idea that we're living in a perpetually shifting epoch. And so I'm just curious.
We need
what
go
ahead.
What does that mean for us? How do we do that? How do we become more nebulous, more flexible, or more liquid, or more? How do we become more serpentine ourselves? We might say.
Mm-hmm. Let me propose this about surfing, resurfing. I like this idea, about the Z-Boys in Venice Beach who invented skateboarding. And they invented skateboarding because they were surfers, and there was a water drought in Los Angeles, so all the swimming pools were dry in everybody's backyard. And so they deterritorialized surfing, and they reterritorialized it to the skateboard into these empty swimming pools. And basically what they're doing is surfing air. So they trade one element for the next. They're like, well, we used to surf water when water was abundant. That was an element that we could take for granted. But we can't now under the conditions of a drought. But now what we do have is the absence of an element that was there before, and now we surf that. So they just surf the absence of an element. And I kind of like this idea as a model for us, because with the disintegration of the institutional society, the disciplinary society, we're absent that element. Those institutions aren't here anymore. And so now we're left with surfing without them. And so we each have to figure out how to surf, how to modulate our own way through a system that's based on these dead ghosts of these dying institutions, but that nonetheless, that we're out of the water, and now we have to learn how to surf the air. And I just like the metaphor that the Z Boys of Venice Beach came up with about if an element's missing, surf that. Surf the absence of what you had before and make that work. And,
right. How do you feel like that fits into Deleuze's concepts that, he was working with Felix Guattari, who he mentions, throughout the 60s, he was working on concepts for making yourself more chaotic, more, well, he would say schizophrenic in order to adapt to the contemporary conditions of capitalism, right? How does that fit into Deleuze's concepts of becoming a nomad or becoming perpetual and ceaseless becoming?
Because we're all becoming nomads now. We're all now starting, the cold hard truth, I think, is dawning on us now that actually we're all unplugged for social formations, and we're all nomadic now under the conditions of hypermodernity. And you just kind of have to be okay with that, because before we had, we romanticized the past, the beats, they were great. Wouldn't you like to have been one of the beats? Or whatever the past social formation is that you romanticize and idealize, they're all gone now. And the hard truth of the matter is that each of us, I think, is on our own. And each of us is a nomad. So we have to learn how to surf in the absence of an element that used to be there before but isn't there anymore. And I just think that it sounds bad. Each of us is on our own. But on the other hand, it does open up a lot of creative freedoms to create and design whatever idea for your life that you want to have. You now no longer have to conform to the molds of previous social formations. Oh, if I got to be a communist, so I need to make sure I follow the good communist mold and not offend it. But that's gone. All that's gone now. So you don't have to fit into any molds anymore. So it does open up a lot of new creative possibilities for you to design and shape your life in whatever way your ideal for living that life is now. There's a lot of freedom here now. So maybe we should accent that aspect of all this, the creative possibilities that it does indeed open up.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting, that as these institutions decay, that might open potential spaces for new ways of being, right? New ways of navigating the world, because now, as you said, there's no particular incentive to follow through with these systems anymore.
Mm-mm. Right. The motive is gone. It reminds me of Doris Lessing's novel. She's one of my all-time favorite writers, The Good Terrorist, which is about a group of IRA terrorists. And it's like, how do I become a good terrorist so that I fit myself into the mold of performing what the social formation of IRA terrorism demands of me? And now you don't have to. And the whole novel was about the conflict of these individuals finding themselves, I don't feel like I'm a good terrorist. I don't feel like I'm up to the challenge. I feel like I'm a bad terrorist. And it's like, we don't have to worry about that anymore. You don't have to be a good communist, a good terrorist, a good capitalist. All that's gone now. Just be yourself and figure out what your particular sign regime is going to be and how you're going to unfold these semiotics through hypermodern cyberspace.
Mm-hmm. And is that something? Is that something that we're all kind of condemned to do individually, right? I mean, it's this thing where now those institutions that were governing your life before are all in crisis, which leaves you adrift, but it also leaves you free to surf the wave on your own, as you said.
Right. Exactly.
But is that something we all have to do individually, or is that something that people like the Z Boys of Venice Beach can come together and do together?
Yeah, that's where the challenge comes in, where all the anxiety comes in. It's like, all right, I'm doing my own thing. I'm not a good this or a good that. I'm just I'm doing John Ebert, let's say. Am I doing John Ebert correctly? And so there's no pre-existing model for you to follow to do John Ebert or to do Leon Sandler. It's just you're your own model now. And so there aren't any other exemplars to follow except what you are creating as you walk along. You're like creating your own path as you walk. The footprints that you leave behind you are the path that you've created. There is no path that you're following. So that's what I would like to conclude on, is that idea. Unless, Matthew, you have anything?
Oh, I just wanted to push back a little bit. He says in it that when we talk about the corporation, because in this new space, the corporation is kind of the one that controls us in the society of control. He talks about marketing as the marketing as the soul of the corporation. So I wonder how free. I get what you're saying. There's no institution, so we would seem freer. But how free are we actually when we bring in that you can do anything you want, but you have to do this, or you have to do it this way. That comes out in marketing, and that comes out in the social media, and then that comes out in just stock standard economic pressures. And when we talk about liquid modernity, was that because the safety net of the welfare state's gone? That's what he was talking about when he talked about in liquid modernity. I can't remember his name, the Polish sociologist, Leon.
Zygmunt Bauman.
Yeah. So in liquid modernity, the social, like, we've given up the welfare state for that freedom, but you still have that economic pressure. You don't have the safety net anymore. So while you are freer to undertake these tasks without that safety net, like, is that still narrow? Am I making sense here? Is that
no.
Like, is that still narrow? Because you have to have that economic freedom to do what you want, and then
that's right.
And then to be perceived as what you are doing, what you want. How much does marketing and social media influence that? Are we actually still doing our authentic task, or are we just being shifted towards this just in a different way, just in a non-institutionalized way? Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I never got the sense that I never worried about money ever in my entire life because I didn't give a shit about it. So I've never worried about it, and I never knew how I was going to make a living outside of all social formations. I knew that I was going to live outside the university, so I didn't have that safety net, or any basic safety net that you would have if you had a 9-to-5 job, or job that you were going to work for 30 years and get a pension. That's all gone anyway.
Yeah.
And so I've just sort of gone from one, I'll figure out how to pay that bill when I get to it. And it always figures itself out somehow. But of course I've never had money. So I have been poor most of my life, but I don't care about it anyway. So I've always made just a sufficient amount to get by. And I think it's a comfort zone with people. Some people are not comfortable just getting by. They want to make sure they've got the mortgage and the house and the property and the owning land and all these other things. They try to trick themselves into believing that if they achieve all that, they'll be happy. And I just have never cared for that. And most of my friends are that way too, poets and artists and writers, all living on the fringes of this society and all just sort of making their way as they go along. And they all seem to figure it out. So there apparently is a logic to this way of living out on the fringes of all social formations and not worrying about money. But it depends on your comfort zone. And it's different from, individual to individual. Some people just aren't comfortable not having anything.
Yeah.
I'm not. It never bothered me.
Yeah. I'm just also trying to get to the, like, when I probably didn't explain myself well enough, so if Leon edit that out. But like, we talk. But we talk about free floating, and now you can choose what to do what you want.
Yeah.
But how much of that is actually us deciding what we want to do? Because there's still so much anxiety. There's still so much worry about it. It still seems to me as though we are still just in a different way outside of these institutions. So the family institution, so you get a job, you raise a family. That's no longer what we're told we have to do. But we still, seems to me that we're led down certain paths in this new space that we find ourselves in through, primarily it seems to be through marketing, and social media, that like you always have to be successful at this thing. You have to be successful and happy and things like that. And then what constitutes success and what constitutes happiness. And it just seems to still be narrow to me in the grand scheme.
We might say, are we living in a free floating kind of desert space, or are we living in a much more straighted space where we don't actually have the possibilities for lateral movement or movement that we think?
I get you. Yeah, I get you. Striated space. Yeah, the issue, and all the flows are coded, and no matter what we do, we always have to deal with the coding of the flows. No flows come free. There's always coding. Yeah, I get you, Matthew.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Am I making sense on that?
Right.
Totally.
Yeah. It's like we may be freer to develop parallel structures or to abandon certain life scripts, but as Deleuze points out, we're not free of mechanisms of control in themselves. Right?
Yes.
It's more like the mechanisms of control become more fluid, and we have to become more fluid with them. Right. The more attached we are to a particular end goal or end state or to a particular identity, the more caught up we're going to be. Whereas I feel like now, because the situation that we're in is so liquid and fluid and mobile, we have to learn to become that ourselves.
So Deleuze talks a lot about becoming, if memory serves me correctly, doesn't he, John?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
the Heraclitus becoming. So, yeah. So, and I gather that would be his response, is that given it's so liquid, you just have to allow yourself to become what you are. And you said it would be more schizophrenic in a Deleuzian term, Leon. Yes.
Right. Not bound to. I mean, we should explain the words.
Yes.
Explain the idea of schizophrenia as Deleuze is using it. We might say, not bound to one particular identity, not bound to a fixed sense of self. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's curious, like, to what extent is that something that's imposed upon us by the nature of the control society, and to what extent is it our tool against, or we might say our weapon against the control society, right? Allowing myself to let go of one identity and morph into another, right? Allowing myself to let go of one space, one territory, one career path, and morph into another. Is that something I can do to liberate myself, or is that something that's...
Yeah, because maybe we've gotten stuck with this sense of self as a molar aggregate. You know, it's just this large molar aggregate. Here's who I am and what I am. But I like Deleuze and Guattari's idea about adopting the schizophrenic model. Maybe the self is a micromolecular assemblage. Maybe it's all these different potentialities, and you don't need to associate yourself with like the single transcendent subject. Transcendental unity of apperception, which is this fancy term for the self. I mean, maybe it doesn't need to be centralized that way, and we can deal with a polytheism of selves within us. Maybe we've inherited the monotheistic idea of the self from Christianity, and maybe that's too one of the structures that the control society has gotten rid of for us, and we can just be polytheistic selves. That's the schizophrenic model. And we don't have to worry about identifying this way or that way, and just once again back to the model of surfing.
Right.
Surfing
it's interesting because we used the metaphor of the labyrinth before, and I think if we continue to think of it in that way, then it's quite foreboding. So if we say, here I am, and I'm trying to navigate this labyrinth to find the end point, to find the way out, to find the ultimate goal of happiness or freedom. Well, we're never going to get there because, again, the labyrinth will just keep shifting on us.
Yeah.
But if we think of it as, okay, it's like I'm riding on this big world serpent, going through the waves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the more that I allow myself to let go and to become whatever this particular situation demands of me, right? Then the more potentialities and possibilities I have. Right. I'd like to. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a much more cheerful metaphor, the server, than the guy stuck in the labyrinth.
Yeah, because I mean, there's not a lot we can do if we stay there. If we stay with the, I think the labyrinth is a great conceptualization. But if we use that concept, then there's really nothing more to say. It's like, oh, well, here we go.
Yeah, because you're just stuck with Kafka's K, and all his various fates, whether it's the castle or the trial or whatever, and that's it. And it's like Kafka himself, I don't think, ever found his way out of the labyrinth. And we don't have to stay stuck there. But I like this surfer thing that Deleuze cheerfully brings out, I think, in this. That may be one of the hidden positive images in this essay that I think is cheerful and worth thinking about. And the more I think about it, I like the idea of surfing the waves because traditionally throughout mythological history, the ocean is thought of as a serpent. It's Ouroboros, or Okeanos, the world encircling serpent. And so I like that idea that you can take the serpent, you don't have to let it bind you in coils like a boa constrictor trying to suffocate you to death, but you can surf it. You can ride the snake. Like Jim Morrison, that was one of his primary metaphors in The Doors, was riding the snake, riding the serpent, and make it work for you. Make its labyrinthine sinuousness work for you. That's the challenge, I think, is how do we make it work for each one of us?
Right, and we might say that part of Deleuze's aim was to help create new concepts that we could use as these situations keep shifting and changing around us, right? If we're stuck to one particular sense of self, one life script, one goal, one political ideology or political party, then we're really ensnared within the mechanisms of control. But
then you let the serpent strangle you in that case, instead of making it work for you.
Exactly. And so I'm just curious, I mean, you know Deleuze better than I do, so what do you think are some Deleuzian concepts that the Deleuze or Deleuze and Guattari invented as a response to this serpentine situation?
Well, the rhizome and the nomad are two that spring to mind. But the problem with the rhizome is that it's great that it's anti-arborescent. It's anti, the plane of organization, which is built up on strata. And the problem with strata is that they're all lawful. They all obey laws. And anytime an entity appears on one of these strata in the arborescent model, you're locked in. And there's all kinds of laws and rules and things imposed upon you. But with the nomad, you can deterritorialize from any of these strata and move around any. I was going to say the problem of the rhizome is it's basically a labyrinth. It's another version of the labyrinth idea that there's no beginning point, there's no ending point. That's all wonderful, but I think that the nomad idea is a much better idea, with the idea of tracing lines of flight from all regimes of capture, from all apparatuses of semiotic capture that want to capture you and bind you into this or that level of the social hierarchy. There's always a line of flight. And this is the cheerful thing that I take from Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus, is that no matter what level on the strata that you're in, there's always a line of flight available to you that you can take and deterritorialize and go elsewhere. You just have to be aware of it and be aware that there's another line of flight.
Yeah, we might see that develop here, as Deleuze saying, well, whatever line of flight you take, you'll find that the strata around you keep shifting to enclose you in some way, or to guide you or mold you in some way. But that's all right, because then you just shift again.
Yes.
It becomes much more of a continuous stream of becoming, as we said, than just one subject going through this line of flight.
Yeah, the shaman is like something that he holds up as a model of a becoming animal. The shaman is always becoming animal, because every time the shaman deterritorializes and traces a line of flight out onto, let's say, the astral plane, he's always transforming into an animal, either a bird as he's flying through the upper world, or a beast as he's going down into the underworld. Let's say in Mesoamerican shamanism, it's the jaguar. The jaguar and the eagle are the two forms that the Mesoamerican shamans like to territorialize and trace lines of flight through. But there's always that line of flight available, and I like the shamanic model too, because the shaman is never captured or bound by a particular social formation. The shaman is always the one who says, I have this technique of ecstasy, to quote Mircea Eliade, that I've inherited that enables me to trace a line of flight to get away from all you guys, and I can go out here onto the astral plane and surf this thing in a becoming animal modality that does not, it enables me to have all these new creative possibilities that you guys stuck in the tribal social formation are just stuck with. You're the hunter, you're the gorgeous woman, you're the priest, whatever the formation happens to be that nails you down. The shaman is always a becoming other, a becoming something else through tracing lines of flight. And the shaman is like another type of nomad, like a sort of nomad of consciousness.
Right. That's quite interesting, because that takes us back to Burroughs, who Deleuze mentions in this essay. We can see the beats as a generation of nomads for something like the modern age, right? And that was, I think, one idea specifically in the 60s when the Beats and Deleuze and Guattari were operating. This kind of what was it? Turn on, tune in, drop out. Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary. Right.
Yeah, that's the idea. Like don't follow this mode of consciousness that's being developed by our society. Try these drugs that'll give you a limited experience, and then use that experience to turn off, right, those conceptual modes of control, right? And I feel like Burroughs, if the Beats were modern nomads, then Burroughs was experimenting with contemporary technologies of shamanism, right?
Yeah, I think.
How do I get myself into that stream of pure becoming?
Yeah.
If I'm not a Mesoamerican shaman. I'm a guy living in New York in the 50s and 60s. What techniques do I have available to enter into that stream of pure becoming?
I like thinking of him as a kind of postmodern shaman, as a kind of, or neo-modern, whatever the term is, a shaman. And that's Burroughs has always been one of my heroes. And I could never quite figure out why, because I read biographies, I read Literary Outlaw by Ted, what's his name? I forget his name. But I always idolized Burroughs for some reason, even though most people would say, oh, he was drug addicted. He was on heroin his whole life. He was just a junkie. But I always, for some reason, saw him as like a model in some way, because he always found a way around every social formation that bonds you into a specific identity. And he was always able to trace a line of flight and to territorialize and go out, whether it was through heroin or through his writing or moving to Tangier.
I was going to say, John, I moved to Tangier because of Burroughs.
Did you really?
You actually did that. Yeah.
I love that.
I went to Tangier because of Burroughs. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and then left. But yeah. Sorry.
Matthew, did you ever read Paul Bowles?
I have. Yes, I have.
He's one of my all-time favorite writers, and he's like an eccentric beat. He's not like one of the beats because his writing style is conventional and traditional, but man, could that dude write. I mean, oh my God, he wrote 4 novels and 1 million short stories, and I read all of them, and I liked him better than almost any of the other beats except for Burroughs. Yeah. And I just thought he was amazing.
I can't remember what book of his, but there's a bookshop in Madrid that has a signed copy for sale of one of his books by him. And it was just like, but yes, I've read Bowles. His wife was also a writer, was she not?
Yeah, Jane. Yeah, she was an alcoholic writer who eventually, I guess, went insane. She had to be institutionalized. Her story is very sad. And Bowles, he was gay, but he loved his wife. So it was like, and Burroughs too was married to a woman that he loved very much as well, except that he killed her, in an accident.
Burroughs was gay as well, was he not?
Yeah, he was bi, I guess, because
Yeah.
he did love his wife. And he was traumatized. He always used to say that he wouldn't have become a writer if he hadn't killed his wife.
Yeah.
That's fucked up, man. Dude.
Paul Bowles got some sort of grant from the U.S. government to just go around North Africa and collect music from different North African tribes.
I remember that.
Oh, really?
And there's a collection available, or that was recently made available, of all of his musical recordings from North Africa during that time, the time during which he wrote Sheltering Sky.
I love that book.
Yeah. So that's interesting that he was able to just kind of con the government into giving him a bunch of money to go and do this cultural research that he wanted to do in North Africa, and he ended up traveling between the states. And
Bowles made it work. He was not drug addicted or anything like that. He was kind of a straight, kind of a square in many respects, but he just made it work. He was so good. Though I read all 4 of those novels. Did you read The Spider's House about Fez? That novel blew me away. I was like, I have to study Fez now. And so I was studying North African Islamic art just so I could learn about how it interfaced with Bowles and his novel about Fez. And they have one of the most beautiful mosques that has ever been created in Fez. It's so translucently beautiful. It's easily the rival of anything the West has produced as far as cathedrals. The mosque at Fez, it's amazing.
Well, I mean, going back to Burroughs, I think what's really interesting about him and his relation to this idea of control that also fascinated him for all of his working life. I would say that the spirit that I get from Burroughs is one of constant experimentation, whether that's sexual experimentation with drugs, experimentation with writing styles, making films, or like the weird kind of semi-magical work that he was doing with Brian Geisen.
I love Brian Geisen.
That's the whole thing.
That's another guy I wanted to mention. I love his art. Brian Geisen, yeah.
Right. But so that's, I mean, we were thinking about what potential like escapes or lines of flight or possibilities there are in relation to the Control Society. And Burroughs himself is a really fascinating case study in just what you can do if you have this mind. Yeah, if you have the mindset of experimentation.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's a perfect exemplar.
I wouldn't condone everything he did, obviously, and I don't necessarily think that taking heroin and shooting your wife, it's not ideal. But just as a case study of what it's possible to do, Burroughs was always interested in that, right? Okay, so I'm faced with these mechanisms of control that are both around me in terms of actual institutions and also operating within me. In terms of identity and my sense of fixed permanent self. So what can I do to disrupt that or to modify it, to change it, to make myself something else, right? I mean, again, I think he suffered a lot through much of his life because of the toll of this experimentation. But it does go to show you that if you take on that spirit, a lot of things are possible. You take on the spirit of the shaman, the way that Burroughs did with Geisen and their experiments, or you take on the spirit of the nomad in the way that the Beats did. Yeah, it's not entirely closed off by the society's control.
For me, when I think of the Beats, I think of those 3 guys: Paul Bowles, William Burroughs, and Brian Geisen. For me, those 3 are the core, and you don't hear much talk about Geisen or Bowles. But Kerouac was good. On the Road's a great book, but I didn't care much for anything else he did. And I don't care for Ginsberg. And I don't like any of the other poets, Gregory Corso or any of those people. I think they're all clones. But those 3 guys were like the architects of what I think of as the Beats. And all 3 of them living in North Africa and Tangier. And just, they're totally eccentric. They're outside of Western civilization. And they're just deterritorialized from it, and they're creating a whole rhizomatic world. Those 3 guys, and they all knew each other and hung out, and I don't know. I love those guys. I worship those guys. I wish I had been one of those guys.
I think you still can. Yeah, I think you still can. And now, I mean, that's kind of
one of those guys.
that's the goal behind things like this: is building again that kind of new community. Whether that's just me and the two of you, or anyone who's listening to this,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, building that idea that we can actually find new modes of being within this present situation, however
On the other hand,
bleak it might be.
on the other hand, another one of my all-time favorite writers is H.P. Lovecraft, and I do sort of like his life too, even though it's the exact opposite. Lovecraft was like, he wrote all of his stories and refused to get a job. He just refused. He would not work a 9-to-5 job, even though he was making a pittance from selling his short stories to Weird Tales. And so he just had to find himself living with his aunts, in their house, and they bought him a house, and he couldn't make the payments on that house, so he lost the house, then went to live at the aunts' houses, which I think is where he wound up in his last days. But he refused to conform to the apparatus of capture of the 9-to-5. And I love H.P. Lovecraft. Even though it's not as exciting or romantic as Burroughs and Geist and the Bulls, but I still like him a lot too. I love his resistance. He was like Melville's Bartleby. I would prefer not.
Yeah.
He was like the living incarnation of Bartleby the Scrivener. I'd prefer not to. No, thank you.
Right. Like if the beats deterritorialized and became nomads and just decided to live on the road or in Tangier, Lovecraft was kind of the opposite. He would not leave Providence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
yeah, that's what I mean.
That's another road to take. Was him just saying,
but he still resisted. He was like, even though he's living in good old-fashioned Providence, refused to leave, he was just nonetheless this force of pure resistance. Nonetheless, there's no way you're going to get this guy to capitulate. He's not going to do it. I love that. It's like passive resistance. I love that guy.
It's like pure great refusal, like McHugh's The Great Refusal, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to come back, so is that what we think Deleuze is saying, to do that, to live on the edges and just ride within it and become what you are, the best you can within where we find ourselves, against the conform, like what we're being forced to conform to. Is that what we're coming to?
Let's take a look maybe at the very end of the final section. The program element, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious because again, the tone of the essay seems pretty ambivalent to me. Let's see. Let's just look at how he's ending it here. One of the most so he talks about the potential use of things like unions, right? And he says, well, this is a question that will have to be decided. How much can the resistance of the past actually impact the current situation? And then he just says, it's up to young people to discover what they're being made to serve, just as their elders discovered without difficulty the telos of the disciplines, right? The end point or the goal of these disciplines they were being forced through. The coils of a serpent are even more complex than the burrows of a molehill, right? So yeah, that's a pretty ambiguous or ambivalent ending.
It is. Yeah.
He's not saying, "Oh, we need to do this" or "We need to do that." I feel Deleuze and Guattari might explore possibilities in other works of theirs, but for this essay, yeah, he just seems to be saying these are the conditions that I see on the horizon, and it's going to be up to other people, right, of the future to figure it out. I mean, he threw himself out of his window in Paris in 1995, so this wasn't quite his problem to solve, but it's our problem to solve, and so that's why I thought that this essay might make a good text for our first episode.
Oh, it's been a great text for our first episode. Maybe we should end here because it's been awesome. I think we'll
see how it goes. But yeah, there's a lot to kind of build on here with this being the outline of the contemporary situation we find ourselves in, and then figures like Burroughs or Bowles offering possible models of resistance. As we go on with other texts in future episodes, this can be something that we go back to kind of see how does this relate to the bigger picture of our current moment.
I was thinking that as we were speaking throughout it, that we'd hark back to this one.
Right.
Yeah. I hope I didn't derail us too much when I messed up a little bit there in the middle. But yeah.
No, any thought that the text provokes is welcome thought, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
No, this is really great. I look forward. I mean, this has been
all right.
Great.
This has been awesome.
Great.
You guys
Thank
were
you
both
guys.
great.
I'll see you next time. And fantastic.
Okay, Leon, I'm going to sign off.
Matt, John, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye.